Hello, I'm Harley Schlanger of the Schiller Institute. Welcome to this week's strategic webcast featuring our president and founder, Helga Zepp-LaRouche. Well, Helga, the big news, according to the Get Trump media and the anti-Trump fanatics, were the dual events yesterday, the conviction of Paul Manafort on 8 counts and the plea bargain agreement also of 8 counts of Trump former attorney Michael Cohen. Now, they're basically saying this is a slam dunk, this is the end of Trump. But LaRouche PAC put out a statement today saying that's not true. It's not true at all. Trump's response was there's still no collusion, there's no crime. So I'd like to start with where do things stand with Russiagate now in the aftermath of these two events?
Well, this is a very, very dangerous situation because obviously, the aim, I mean, as you say, there is absolutely no connection between what Manafort did before he got associated with Trump. And, it's highly dubious what Michael Cohen is doing because obviously one of the federal judges, I think his name is T.S. Eliot, had said that the whole purpose of this witch hunt is to terrorize Manafort or Michael Cohen in such a way so that they, threatened with many years of jail, basically turn against Trump and start singing like a canary, and that rather than reporting the reality, that they start to, quote, compose just to get out of this. And this is obviously what Michael Cohen has done. And obviously, the payment for these women, saying that this is a campaign fund violation. Well, I mean, this is all, this happens in major campaigns all the time. Obama had to pay a fine at a certain point. The former presidential candidate Edwards was accused of something similar and then was acquitted. So, I mean, this is all hyped up to proportions which are in no relation to the initial task of, or supposed task of Mueller, namely to prove that there was collusion between Trump, the Trump campaign, and Putin and Russia. So, this is obviously, designed to, one could almost think to, get the turnout in the midterm election of those people hating Trump higher, so that basically the hope is that you get a Democratic majority in the Congress, and then, basically there would be enough forces to impeach Trump. But, there is no substance to it. And, I can only say that the ongoing investigation in the Congress about the collusion between the heads of intelligence of the Obama administration and British intelligence are still going on. And you almost have a complete countdown of, of these two processes. I think if you look at the efforts by various British cabinet ministers coming to Washington, trying to reestablish the special relationship with the United States, which Trump had clearly canceled or, basically put aside, in an absolute frenzy against Russia and a growing frenzy against China. I think that shows you, what the real strategic intention of this is. And the good thing is that Trump so far has kept his nerves, but all kinds of foreign policy issues go haywire, and obviously this is an extremely dangerous situation.
On this question of the danger, we've pointed out there's now 75 days until the midterm election. And there has to be a response, not just to the fraud of Russiagate, but to the underlying effort of Russiagate, which is to destroy Trump's potential from changing the policy away from the Bush Obama paradigm into collaboration with Russia and China. What's being fought out over the next couple of months is not just a normal election, but what will be US strategic policy in relationship to Russia, to China? What about the economy? So I'd like to begin, because there's so much to talk about, but I'd like to begin with this question of what do people need to know about this strategic conjuncture and what do they have to do?
Well, you have not only the worsening of the relationship between the United States and China, because the Chinese are in the meantime absolutely convinced that the tariffs, 16 billion were imposed on each side today, that this has nothing to do with trade as such, but it has everything to do to curb the rise of China and aim at the effort by China to become a world leader in certain high-tech areas by 2025. So this is no good. I mean, this is a terrible situation. Then the fact that almost every day new sanctions are being imposed on Russia is also absolutely terrible. So then we have the danger of a pending financial crash, much worse than that of 2008. You look at the reversed carry trade flow of capital out of the emerging markets into the dollar, into Wall Street, into the city of London. This is potentially triggering a whole collapse. Then you have the many warnings that the tapering of the Federal Reserve must stop, that they should go back to a quantitative easing full scale, and otherwise there is a danger of a collapse way before the midterm election. So if you look at all of these processes, the big question is, how can you address it in such a way that you lift the whole discussion on a higher level? And that is why the Schiller Institute has put out a petition calling for a new Bretton Woods, and especially appealing to the four leaders of the United States, Russia, China, and India, namely Trump, Putin, Xi Jinping, and Modi, and basically that they should immediately agree to solve this problem by going back, preempt the danger of a financial crash by going back to a new Bretton Woods, fixed exchange rates, and establish a new credit system in order to facilitate cooperation in the context of the new paradigm and the cooperation with the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, is that realistic? Well, I think it is, because Russia, China, and India are already very strongly cooperating along these lines. And Trump has proven in his initial relationship with China, with his friendship with Xi Jinping, that he is absolutely capable of going in this direction, and also his efforts to improve the relationship with Russia, and especially his meeting with Putin in Helsinki, show that potential. And that is why this frenzy by the political establishment is so unbelievably hysterical, because they do see this potential. Now, what we are doing is we are collecting signatures, and I appeal to you, our viewers, that you should also sign this petition. We are right now collecting signatures from many people all over the world, both ordinary citizens, but also some institutional people, which we will publish shortly. And you will be seeing that there are many people from quite different fields of life, of military, former diplomats, people in high position of different social organizations, who all agree that you need to establish such a higher level of cooperation if the world is not supposed to go up in flames. So my appeal would be, that both you should, get out our dossiers on the role of the British in this whole Russiagate affair, and also sign the petition, because we absolutely have only a very short window of opportunity. Because once you have a financial crash, an uncontrolled collapse, even before the midterm election, that would throw the world into absolute havoc, and all kinds of crisis spots could go out of control. So it is very urgent that we establish a higher level of cooperation of the major countries who have the power to resist Wall Street and the City of London. And the only new discussion which came up in this context is actually a request from some people from Japan that we should include Prime Minister Abe and Japan into this list of countries. So we are discussing this right now. In any case, I want to stress that these four powers are not exclusive, because the idea is just to bring together a powerful enough combination, and then other countries should orientate towards that. But you need a very solid power base in order to get this kind of reform. So please, if you see any reason in this proposal, please sign it and distribute it to your friends and relatives and acquaintances and social media, and help us to build this movement for a new Bretton Woods, because you have to change the agenda if the world is not supposed to go under in this complete frenzy and hysteria.
I think one of the points you just made that people should take to heart is that the hysteria of the reaction to what we're doing, to what Trump is doing, is evidence that there is a real fear among the geopoliticians, the neoconservatives, the anti-Trumpers, that this could happen. I mean, one example of this is when we put out 2 or 3 months ago a call for an end to the special relationship. We're now seeing one after another British official come to the Congress to praise the special relationship. This week it was Foreign Secretary Hunt. And in the discussions that he had, he kept saying the special relationship is the core of the protection of the West against the aggressive Russians. We have the person who replaced the discredited Victoria Nuland, a man named Wes Mitchell, who spoke in the Congress yesterday about establishing a new position, which is part of an anti-Russian activity coordinator with the British. So clearly there's a reaction to this. And then also, Helga, you were reporting earlier, there are plans for very extended NATO maneuvers in October. What can you tell us about that?
Well, this is obviously a big provocation, because it's the largest military maneuver since the end of the Second World War. It involves 40,000 soldiers of 30 countries and basically goes all along the Russian border. And it goes from the 25th of October until the 7th of November. That is one day after the US election. And then later come also major Russian maneuvers. So when you have this kind of situation, maneuvers could always go very quickly from a maneuver into a hot war. And I'm not saying that that is the plan, but in a world which is so unstable and where so many provocations are happening, and the tone is becoming so wild and out of any proportion of what Russia has been doing. If you look at what Russia and China are doing in reality, I mean, the Crimea was not annexed, and that is being kept repeated. And up the Wahoo, the coup attempt against Ukraine was conducted. You mentioned Victoria Nuland, and you had the State Department spending $5 billion on NGOs for a color revolution, a regime change in Ukraine. There was the Maidan coup with a lot of Nazis involved. And then, basically the vote of the people in Crimea was the reaction to all of these things. So it's not true that Putin annexed Crimea. So all these lies are being repeated, and people have a very short memory, and therefore this becomes the narrative. But I think it's really important that I mean, the fact that Germany is now participating with 100 tanks in these maneuvers, I mean, this is really incredible. And I know from many Russians that they are really very upset about the unthankfulness of the German political class, for sure, because the Russian agreement to the German unification, peaceful unification, you would have expected that the promises were kept not to extend NATO to the borders of Russia would have been kept. But no, now you have these war hawks who are joining in these provocations against Russia. So this is terrible, and we have to absolutely counter that and re-establish diplomacy and dialogue as a means of solution to any problem and not this kind of frenzy.
And don't forget, one of the key actors in Ukraine on the US side was former CIA Director John Brennan, who has been screeching and screaming because it obviously uh, his role is exposed and he's out front. And he's been so extreme that even some of his buddies like James Clapper are telling him to calm down a little bit. I want to point out one thing, Helga. In spite of all this anti-Russian propaganda in the US media, a Gallup poll came out yesterday that said that 60% of Americans still favor better relations with Russia. And this has been the policy that President Trump has called for from the beginning. Now, there was an initiative from the German foreign minister that seemed kind of strange to me. I wonder if you can enlighten us as to what Herr Maas is planning on doing.
Well, I think, I'm not saying that it's not necessary to become more independent, because obviously, whenever the United States, even, with the recent developments we referred to earlier, but if the United States is trying to extend US legislation all over the world, this is obviously doesn't have a democratic mandate, and therefore there is an element in what Maas is saying which is understandable and legitimate, and that is that that Germany should become more independent. That has been our position since a very long time. But naturally, what are his solutions? I mean, he wants to have an independent German policy towards the United States. He wants to have a militarization of the EU. If you really look at it, if you look at the condition of the EU, what it comes down to is a Eurocentric coalition of the willing, because there is no more EU unity, and not many countries of the EU are intending to join the relatively anti-Russian sharp tone of Maas, who has come out against China and against Russia. So it's some Eurocentric idea that you can build an independent Europe, an independent payment system. That is not a bad idea either, because you don't want to be hit by secondary sanctions, which you do not agree with. But I think it's an absolutely non-workable position, because if you would want to have some conception, you would basically say we need a Eurasia from the Atlantic to to the Chinese Sea, from Vladivostok to Lisbon. And you would say we have to have a new economic union, a new security architecture, not against the United States, but inclusive with the United States. You would think in terms of getting really a new system that works. This way, it's supposed to, he says the old partnerships don't exist anymore, which is true. But he says the only one which we keep and which is still functioning is NATO. And then he wants to have this independent Europe, defense force. And I think it's a non-starter. It's bad because it's anti-Russia, it's anti-China. It doesn't address the fundamental economic interest of Germany, which would be to cooperate with the projects of the new Silk Road in Africa, in the Middle East. So I think it's not a good thing.
Well, while we're seeing this kind of chaos and disruption in the transatlantic region, including in the United States, largely due to the idiocy of the Congress, we're seeing a continued, consistent drive from China to bring development to the world. And there are a number of leading items of this we can take up, but I'd like to start with the development out of Italy, with the announcement of a China task force that the Italians are going to be moving to work more closely with China. How does that look, Helga?
Well, that is a very refreshing development, because the new Italian finance minister, Tria, is with a delegation in China. And there is a second delegation led by Michele Geraci, who is the Undersecretary of Commerce, who is with a second delegation. And he announced the formation of such a China task force, with the idea to not just passively watch what is going on, but to keep pace with the shift of innovation and technology to Asia and to China in particular. And he basically, is then asked in an interview with Corriere della Sera, is this not Chinese taking influence and the usual kind of questions? And he said, no, China is the world leader in terms of infrastructure. Our infrastructure is in a terrible condition. Obvious reference to this bridge which just collapsed in Genoa, and that Chinese investment in Italian infrastructure is very welcomed and needed. And on the other side, he's also encouraging Italian firms not only to invest in China, but make joint ventures in all countries along the Eurasian land bridge and also in Africa. So I think this is a very wonderful breath of fresh air. Now, as I mentioned already, there are more and more countries who want to cooperate with China in Europe. One is the new Austrian government, the 16 plus 1 Eastern and Central European countries, Greece, Italy, Spain, Portugal. So I think that the trend is clearly there. And in Germany, it's fortunately the Bavarians who are very happily talking about the extension of the new Silk Road into Bavaria. And there are many political exchanges between Chinese and Bavarian politicians and businessmen. So I think that is also a very good step in the right direction. Now, I don't know what will happen down the road, but we are organizing to get all European countries and the United States to cooperate with the new paradigm. And we need obviously a lot of people to understand that mankind has reached a point where if we continue with geopolitical hysteria, the extinction of civilization could be very close. So people should wake up and really understand that there is no reason why the major powers of this world cannot and should not cooperate in overcoming poverty, in overcoming underdevelopment. I mean, the United States has many pockets of third world conditions. I mean, if you go to Alabama or you go to Tennessee or some of these southern states, you find areas which are like third world. The same way, take Germany, a so-called rich country, has 4.4 million poor children, and this is increasing. In Italy, in Greece, the EU austerity policy has halved the cost for medical expenses, and 25,000 health related jobs were destroyed since the Troika is raving in this country. Now confront that and compare that to the absolute unbelievable record of China, which in 1978, 97.8% of all people in rural areas were poor. Then, in the last 40 years or 39 years, they managed to get 740 million people out of poverty. The total poverty rate right now in China is 3.1%. And they want to eradicate that and uplift the living standard of these people until 2020. So there is no poverty left in China. So people should really not become so absolutely hysterical, but they should look at the facts. Maybe China is doing something right, which the neoliberal monetarist system is doing wrong. And China is now offering its own model of economic transformation and share that experience, for example, with Africa. There's coming up at the beginning of September a very major conference involving China and I think all heads of state of Africa. And it was just announced this will be shared by Xi Jinping, and he will announce their new concepts of cooperation between China and Africa, many, many areas of joint science, joint education, many other new things. And I think that there are two dynamics. One is development and cooperation, and the other one is confrontation with the danger of war. So people should really make up their mind on what side of history they want to be on, and be part of the Schiller Institute, become a member, sign our petition, become active. Don't be standing on the sidelines at the most crucial moment in history. And if you are an American, you should make sure that this coup attempt is defeated. You don't have to agree with all the policies of President Trump. That's not the point. But the point is to defeat a coup which would bring back a crew of people who have become absolute war hawks. And this would bring the world into absolute danger if these people would be back in the driver's seat. And the potential which exists now would be destroyed, and probably it could not be revived, and we would head towards a disaster of unbelievable dimensions in history.
Well, what you're just describing is really should be an exciting challenge to all of our viewers. The opportunity to not just defeat the evil that's represented by the people running the Russiagate case, but the actual potential in Africa, this conference coming up September 3rd and September 4th. Also, we see this in El Salvador, in Mexico, in Panama. The new Silk Road spirit is now infecting much of Central America. And this is something that would have an obvious benefit to the United States, just as the development of Africa could stem the flood of refugees crossing the Mediterranean into Europe. The development of Honduras, of El Salvador, of parts of Mexico that were damaged by NAFTA, this brings a tremendous opportunity. So this is what the people who are running Russiagate are trying to stop, to keep us in the old paradigm. Helga, I think you had some thoughts on this whole question of El Salvador as another example of a shift occurring worldwide.
Yes, the State Department had a very negative reaction to it, but it's very clear that El Salvador, which has a new president, his name is Sanchez Saren, and he made a national speech in the TV where he said that he had promised in the election campaign that he would transform the life of all families of El Salvador, and that the new relationship with the People's Republic of China would be very beneficial in this direction. Now, I mean, there are more countries joining and seeing that to be with Taiwan and not accept the one policy of China does not bring them any advantages, and that basically the way to go is with the new Silk Road. Now, similar things happen in all of Latin America, which is in an unbelievable crisis right now. You have the emerging country crisis in Argentina, in Brazil. You have a wild situation in Argentina where they're ganging up against Christine Kirchner. So, the question is really, where is the directionality which brings cohesion, which brings peace, which brings a future? And I think that more and more countries, want to have a future. It's very simple. I think we are in an unbelievable upheaval. You have two dynamics. One dynamic is one of trying to keep the oligarchical system of neoliberalism, which really expanded like a cancer after Nixon decoupled the dollar from gold in 1971 and got rid of the fixed exchange rates. And there are people who just want to keep that system, which only benefits very few, which is really the reason why all these wars of intervention took place. Remember that George Bush Senior, at the time of I think it was the second Gulf War, he said that the United States had to go in there to protect the American way of life. Well, I mean, I think that is a non-tenable position. And, the big question now is, can the model of China, which is proposing a new model of superpower cooperation based on sovereignty, on respect for the other social model, and then have a win-win cooperation of all nations, is that going to succeed? Or is the confrontation the going to be, what they call the Thucydides trap, referring to the tensions in the Peloponnesian, preceding the Peloponnesian War between Sparta and Athens, which led to the demise of ancient Greece. And will that be repeated? Now, with nuclear powers, this could, be the end of humanity. So people should really study the new paradigm, and basically help the Schiller Institute to bring in some reason in the debate, and show the options which exist for change. So let me repeat my absolute appeal to you: help us to distribute this petition for a four-power agreement, and sign it, get it around among all people and let's just have a mobilization to bring in a completely different level, a level of reason among all nations, in order to protect world peace and bring in development and look towards the future. Let's get a new sense of what humanity is all about. We are not animals. We are not, killing each other for no purpose except to fill our stomach, like wild animals tend to do. But we are a species of reason. We can discover the laws of the universe. We can have space exploration. We can discover new scientific things. We can have a completely different identity as human beings, relating to each other like scientists, like composers, like poets. And I think that if mankind is supposed to make it, we have to make this qualitative jump and have a new cultural renaissance. Because if we stay in this old geopolitical paradigm, the future will be very grim. So join our efforts and become a member. Help us to circulate this petition and get as many signatures as possible.
Well, Helga, you just summarized the exciting challenge before all of us to truly become human. I would add one thing, that people should also go to our site and purchase a copy of the new report on the Middle East and Africa and the land bridge development policy, so you yourself can become familiar with these ideas and what the Chinese are doing and what this new China model is, what the new paradigm is. So Helga, anything else you want to add?
Well, I think, I want to encourage all of you to go to our archives in the various pages, like, the Schiller, Schiller Institute page, the LaRouche page, other pages we have internationally, and reread all the writings of my husband, because he has addressed all of these issues in the most profound way, and his scientific method is more urgently needed today than at any time before. So become familiar with these ideas, because there is a lot of unclarity about a lot of these issues. So I would encourage you to study LaRouche.
Good advice. Okay, Helga, we'll see you next week.
Okay, hopefully in a cooler weather.
Yeah.